Hi, welcome to the 2D to 3D course. In this course, I will introduce you to the Maxon 3D software, that is, Cinema 4D. It is used in architectural visualization, TV animations, cinema, animated cartoons, motion design, and many other fields. It is super easy to grasp thanks to its user-friendly interface. This is really cool as you can easily acquire new skills for working with 3D. If you're a motion designer who started your career working in After Effects, you were right about starting to learn Cinema 4D. You will make your life much easier by creating 3D objects instead of cumbersome fake 3D objects in After Effects that have limited animation options. Yeah, I've been through this myself. Having gained immense experience, I'll share my knowledge and show you the essentials a beginner 3D motion designer needs to know. Let's get started. Let's outline the course program. The first part of the lessons is introductory. In it, we'll cover the user interface, learn all the tabs and windows, and how to navigate in the 3D space. You'll learn what the Object Manager is and the types of objects in Cinema 4D. We'll talk about the workflow, and later we'll install some cool plugins and the Redshift renderer, because it's the renderer we'll be working with in the future. The next part of the lessons is dedicated to modeling. In it, we will cover the types of modeling and approaches to modeling. We'll learn more about deformers and generators, which are most often used to create models. We'll find out what a MoGraph is and how fields work. Next, we'll cover spline modeling. I'll introduce you to splines, and we'll briefly talk about the possibilities and options for using splines. Polygonal modeling. In this lecture, we will consider the types of polygonal models and talk about the tools for working with polygons and mention geometry optimization. The next part covers modeling for subdivision surface. We'll break down the general principles of modeling for subdivisions and the technical details. The next part is working with light. Since this topic involves rendering, we'll take a look at Redshift. We'll talk about working with light and lighting effects and consider lighting schemes. Next, there's a lecture on materials and UV. We'll learn how to create, apply, and customize materials. We'll also take a look at the principles of creating UVs and baking textures. The next lesson will be about rendering. We'll go over the approach to rendering and setting up the Redshift renderer. We'll also create the final imagery. Lesson on animation. It includes an introduction to animation, its types, and the general workflow. We'll consider the basic principles of camera animation and the animation of simple deformers. We'll also cover the general principles of working with bones and setting weights. And finally, we'll build the project in After Effects. We'll learn how to build a project in After Effects, how to correctly import the sequences, null objects, and the camera from C4D. We'll compose 2D animation and sequences. Pretty cool, right? After covering each topic, we'll have a practical lesson in which we will create objects from the 2D to 3D promo video, cementing the knowledge you've gained. Finally, we'll create a scene in After Effects. It's gonna be awesome. Let's take a look at the Cinema 4D UI. In my case, the program version is R23. From version to version, developers can rearrange some buttons or commands, or add new things. So ideally, you should use the same version of the program, especially if you're a beginner, so that you don't encounter any problems. This is a theoretical lesson, so it is not necessary to repeat after me. When you start the program, you will be presented with the standard layout of the C4D interface. For each task, the developers have prepared the optimal layouts of the interface. Let's start by looking at the standard layout. We'll go through only the main windows and panels, otherwise it will take too long. But if you want to learn more about a particular panel or button, there is a great function called Help. Hover over the needed button, right-click and select Show Help, or press Ctrl F1. You will see a tab with a detailed description. It is a very useful feature. Let's go back to the interface. The top bar is the main menu. It contains almost all Cinema 4D commands. Some commands are repeated as buttons, thus creating command palettes. Command palettes are toolbars. The standard layout contains the most necessary ones, but you can add the tools you need specifically to existing panels or create your own. I'll show you how to do this in a short while. The most important window is the View panel. In this window, we will work with 3D models. It is quite convenient to navigate in the window. In the corner of the window, there are buttons that are responsible for navigating in 3D space, moving, and rotating in 3 axes. The button on the far right turns on and off additional views and orthogonal projections of 3D models. These functions can also be activated with the mouse. Left mouse button and Alt is for rotation, hold the mouse wheel and Alt to move, and the right mouse button plus Alt is for scaling. By pressing the middle mouse button without Alt, you can turn on orthogonal projections. There are also hotkeys for switching views. These are F1, F2, F3, and F4. This window has a local menu with settings for displaying objects in the viewport. The View tab. It has tools for moving in the viewport, resetting the camera, and undoing actions. Be careful. There are hotkeys like Ctrl-Shift-Z and Ctrl-Shift-Y for canceling the camera offset. Out of habit, you can accidentally change the position of the camera instead of canceling an action. Cameras. By default, the camera is in the perspective view, but it can be changed to one of the available views, orthogonal or axonometric. Display. These are the settings for displaying 3D models in the viewport. At the stage of creating objects, the Gouraud shading lines view is most often used, since it conveys the volume and segmentation of the model. Options. There are various settings from setting the level of detail of objects to setting the configuration of the viewport. Filter. Here you can turn off the display of irrelevant objects in the viewport. For some reason, display of some objects in the scene sometimes needs to be turned off. For example, at the stage of creating animation, there are already a lot of objects in the scene, and deformers or splines make it even more confusing. This panel allows you to turn off their visibility. The next tab is Panel. It has various layouts of viewport windows. Each of these layouts can be configured with its own camera, projection type, and display mode. The next panel is Object Manager. This window displays a list of objects that you are working with in the scene. When creating a new object, it is added to the top of the list. The hierarchy allows you to create child objects by parenting them to each other. I will select the objects and parent them to the topmost one. When dragging objects onto the pyramid, a downward arrow appears. This means that these objects will become children of this object. That is, we have grouped them in a pyramid object. A menu with various commands and tags can be accessed by right-clicking the object. Further, in practice, we will analyze this in more detail. The window also has a local menu. File. This tab has commands for importing and exporting an object. Edit. Menu with selection and copying commands. View. With this menu, you can change the size of the icons or a hierarchy. Object. Stores certain commands for hiding, converting, and grouping objects. To activate the commands, you need to select the object. Tags. This tab has the tags, but you also need to select objects to activate them. Each object has these buttons. They allow you to hide it in the viewport and during render, respectively. The green checkmark is responsible for the functioning of generators, deformers, or other parametric objects. And this square is responsible for the layers. I will create several copies of the object and add them to a new layer. To create copies, just select the needed object and drag it down while holding down Ctrl. I'll create all objects and right-click. Next, select the Add to New Layer command. All these squares have turned purple, which means that they have been added to the layer, and a new object has appeared in the Layer Manager. Layer Manager. It's a very cool thing that simplifies working with a large number of objects. It also gives the ability to lock objects, turn off visibility in the Object Manager, or during rendering. It also has a local menu. Layers tab. It is for creating new layers and working with them. Edit. It has various commands for deleting and selecting layers. View. The tab that lets you control which items should be displayed in a manager window. To create a layer, you can drag the object to the Layers menu or right-click, then assign a new layer or add to an existing one. If you want to add several objects to one layer, you can paint them with this brush or select the needed objects and drag and drop them under the layer in the manager. Attribute Manager. This window displays all possible attributes and settings. Scene attributes will be shown when the program starts. When an object or a tool is selected, its attributes will be shown accordingly. This window also has a local menu. Mode. In the Mode tab, you can select the needed mode, configure them, or lock, since by default in this window the attributes of the current instrument or object are displayed. Edit. It has various copying and selecting objects commands. User Data. This command allows you to create controllers for various manipulations with objects. Coordinates Manager. It allows you to manipulate with objects in various ways. Depending on the tool used, the information about the position, dimensions, and rotation of the active element will be displayed. Materials Manager. Materials will be stored in this panel. This panel also has a local menu with settings. Here you can create, edit, select, delete, customize the view, group materials, and other functions. Animation Panel. It displays the timeline in a simplified way. Here, animation keyframes, the current frame, and the length of the composition are displayed. It has buttons for playing animation, moving through the keyframes, buttons for recording certain parameters, or all of them at once. This is not the main tool. This is a separate timeline for animation, which has more functionality than this panel. We will cover the timeline in more detail in the lesson on animation. Next, consider a thing called Bookmarks. Bookmark is a hidden panel that opens up when you click on its title. Thus, you can configure any number of windows you need and place them as a bookmark to hide them for a while. The next panel is the Global Status Bar. It's in the lower left side of the program. When you hover over the tool, its brief description is displayed along with various calculations, saving, and other processes. Let's move on to the UI layouts. This menu has the most optimal layouts for various needs, such as sculpting, animation, UV creation, and so on. Not all available windows are shown in the standard view. By going to the Window menu, you can open additional panels. How do you customize the layout? All windows of the program can be customized to your liking. To unpin the window, right-click the Unlock button. Next, drag the window by these strips and attach it to the desired place. To create a bookmark, you need to move the window to the strips. If you click on them holding down Control, the panel will hide. To open it, just click on the Hidden panel. To add buttons or create your own panels, you can call the Customize Palettes menu. You can open it by right-clicking on an empty space. To create a new panel, click on this button and drag the necessary tools or add the needed tool to the existing panels. Next, type in the desired tool and drag and drop it to the panel. To remove unnecessary buttons, double-click them. To unpin the panel from the main menu, you need to hold down the left mouse button and hover over the upper area with the dots. When it is highlighted in white, release the mouse button. By right-clicking, you can access the settings where you can change the size of the icons and turn off the display of text. After you have finished configuring it, you need to save the layout. To do this, go to Window, Customization, Save Layout As. Now let's talk a little more about the toolbars. The first button contains selection tools. Holding it down, a submenu will open up with a choice of tools. Next are the Move, Scale, and Rotate tools. The following buttons are responsible for locking the axis of the selected object. This button is to switch between the global and local coordinates of the object. The next three buttons are the Render menu. The first button is rendering in the preview window. The second one is rendering in the picture viewer. The third button is responsible for rendering settings. Next are the commands for creating objects. Primitives are shown in blue, polygonal, and spline ones. Generators are shown in green. These are the objects that imply the creation of something. Usually you need to parent an object to them, but there are exceptions, such as instance. Deformers are shown in purple. Objects are parented to them. Fields are shown in pink. A field is an area that constrains an effect. Next, go to Scene Objects, Cameras, Light Sources. Now let's look at the sidebar. The first button is for converting parametric objects into polygonal ones. It lets us edit points, faces, or polygons. Generators can also be converted into polygonal objects or editable splines. To do this, press this button or the hotkey C. But this approach doesn't work for deformers. In this case, there is a separate current state to object command accessible by right-clicking on the selected object or in the drop-down list. Next, we will consider the modes of operation. The main mode is the model editing mode. In this mode, we can manipulate the object. For example, select it, move it, resize and rotate. By holding it down, a drop-down window with additional modes will appear. Object Editing Mode. It is used for animation, since in this mode it is not the geometry of the object that changes, but its coordinate system. That is, an object has parametric or geometric values of size. This is size. There is also a scale parameter used for scaling. If we resize a cube in the object mode, we can see that its scale is changing. But when you switch to the model editing mode, it is the size that changes. Therefore, use this mode at the animation stage, otherwise artifacts may appear. The next one is the texture editing mode. Let's create a material and add it to the object. Now, if we change the projection settings of the material, for example, to a spherical one, we have a corresponding object that can be moved around, thereby adjusting the texture. Next, we have Point Editing Mode, Editing Mode for Faces, and Polygon Editing Mode. These three modes only work for converted primitives and splines. UV Editing Mode. When enabled, UV elements will be edited instead of mesh geometry. It is equivalent to moving a mesh in the Texture UV Editor settings. Editing Axis. It works with all modes, but only for converted objects. Now let's select a parametric cube object. Let's start shifting its center and notice that it is impossible. Solo modes. Snap mode, and work plane settings. Great, we've figured out the interface a little. Now let's talk about workflow. In this course, we will create models from ready-made illustrations, but you won't have such a workflow always. So let's consider the case when you need to create a video by yourself. This is how simplistic a process like this often looks like. The most important stage is preparing for production. It all starts with an idea. Then you need to create a script, storyboards and animatics, search for references, and so on. This is an especially important stage because how much time you spend on all other stages will depend on it. Instead of inventing or fishing something on the fly, for example at the modeling stage, it will be faster to do it on paper. 3D modeling. After you have decided what your model will look like, make sketches or find some ready-made solutions. You can start modeling. Build or compose a composition. This is the very step when you assemble the models into your scene, into a single composition. Lighting. Configure and arrange the lights. Texturing. Create materials and textures for models and environments. Rigging. This stage does not always fall into the workflow, but if you have a character, then you cannot avoid it. Animation. The next step is to animate the scene and objects. Rendering. In this stage, we create the final picture or video sequence. Compositing. Post-processing, rendering, compositing, exporting the final video into After Effects. This is what the video developing process looks like when freelancers do everything on their own. Within a studio environment, there is the concept of a pipeline, where a specific task is assigned to a specific person or team. For example, modeling or animation. In this case, a person or a team need to get design brief from the project manager and complete it on time. Otherwise, the pipeline will be violated, the deadlines will shift, and affect the next stages of product creation. This is already a real conveyor, in which some processes can run in parallel. The pipeline in each studio may differ slightly, but the main thing is that the order of responsibilities is clearly distributed. Superb. Now let's figure out how to install plugins. There are two great plugins that I use all the time: Magic Solo and Drop to Floor. You can find the links to them in the lesson's description. To install them, you just need to move the downloaded files into the plugins folder. The path to it is C, Program Files, Maxon, Cinema 4D R23, Plugins. After restarting the program, plugins will appear in the Extensions tab. For convenience, I add buttons for these plugins in a plain view. You can apply hotkeys to them, which is also convenient. Install the trial version of Redshift. To do this, go to the maxon.net website. On the main page of the website, go to Try and download the Maxon app. After downloading this application, install it. Authorize when you install the application. In this area, you need to select Try to install the trial version of the plugin. I have already selected this mode, and the banner shows how many days are left until the end of the trial version. Next, scroll down, find Redshift, and click Install. Select Latest Version and download it. Next, an installation window will pop up. Select the desired version of Cinema 4D and install Redshift. After installation, the plugin will be available in the main menu. This lesson is over. Thank you all.